The knife was sterling silver glinting against the pristine glass walls of my mother's Lake Tahoe estate. It sliced through the fondant with surgical precision. My mother, Patricia, handed a generous corner piece to my nephew Mason. Then she paused in front of my 9-year-old daughter Sophia. The room went silent. Patricia didn't blink. She simply said she shouldn't be here. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't ask for an explanation. I grabbed Sophia's hand, turned my back on the lake view, and walked straight out the front door. Before I tell you how a $32,000 secret destroyed my mother's reputation, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. It helps me feel less alone in sharing this. The silence in my SUV wasn't heavy. It was clarifying. For the first time in years, the static noise of trying to please my mother was gone, replaced by the low, steady hum of tires on the highway. In the rearview mirror, I watched Sophia. She wasn't crying. She was staring out the window, clutching the small wooden boat she had carved for Mason, the gift my mother had called clutter before tossing it onto a side table. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed the quiet to dissect what had just happened. For years I had treated my mother's cruelty like bad weather, something unpredictable that you just had to endure. I told myself she was just particular or stressed. I told myself that if I just bought the right gift, wore the right dress, or secured the right promotion, the weather would change. But as the distance between us and that glass-walled fortress grew, the fog lifted. I realized I hadn't been fighting for love. I had been caught in a psychological loop. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement. It is the most addictive form of conditioning on Earth. It is how you train a lab rat to keep pressing a lever even when it shocks him. You don't shock him every time. You don't reward him every time either. You give him a pellet of food just often enough to keep him hoping, but randomly enough that he never knows when it's coming. That was Patricia. She would criticize my career for months, but then once a year she would tell her friends I was talented within earshot. She would ignore Sophia's birthdays, but then send a random expensive dress in the mail. Those tiny, unpredictable crumbs of validation kept me pressing the lever. They kept me hoping that this time the pattern would break. They kept me addicted to the potential of a mother I never actually had. But the cake, that wasn't a random shock, that was a statement. By serving everyone else and publicly excluding my daughter, she wasn't just being mean, she was establishing a hierarchy. She was teaching Mason that he was a king and teaching Sophia that she was a peasant. She was trying to train my daughter to accept the same scraps I had survived on for 34 years. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't sad anymore. Sadness implies a loss, and I realized I hadn't lost anything real. I had simply woken up. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was only 2 in the afternoon. We had arrived at the lake house at noon. The entire illusion of family had shattered in less than 2 hours. I didn't feel the urge to call her and beg for an explanation. I didn't feel the need to text my brother Tyler to ask him to mediate. Those impulses belonged to the old Natalie the rat in the cage. The new Natalie was driving 70 miles per hour away from the experiment. By the time we pulled into our driveway, my modest, warm, safe driveway, my tears had dried completely. I turned off the engine. I wasn't wondering what I had done wrong. I was wondering what else she was hiding. Because you don't treat your own flesh and blood like an employee you're trying to fire unless you are protecting something. Or hiding something. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I wasn't going inside to cry into a pillow. I was going inside to check the books. I unlocked the front door of our bungalow. The air inside was still and smelled of lemon polish and safety. Sophia walked straight to the living room and placed the small wooden boat she had carved for Mason on the coffee table. It was rough-hewn, sanded by her own hands for 3 weeks. At the lake house, my mother had glanced at it, called it charming clutter, and swept it aside to make room for Mason's new drone. Seeing that boat sitting there rejected triggered a memory from just 3 hours earlier, a data point I had tried to ignore in the moment but which now fit perfectly into the equation. It was lunch. The main dining table at the lake house is a slab of imported mahogany that seats 12. My mother, my brother Tyler, his wife, and Mason all took their seats. When I moved to pull out a chair for Sophia, Patricia stopped me. She pointed to a folding card table set up near the kitchen swinging door, the kind you use for overflow catering staff. "It's just better for the flow, Natalie," she had said, her voice devoid of friction. "Plus, Sophia is messy. We don't want stains on the upholstery before the photo shoot." We weren't family. We were liabilities. We sat at the wobbling plastic table eating cold rolls while the real family laughed over lobster bisque 10 feet away. I had swallowed that humiliation like a bitter pill, telling myself it was temporary. Then came the photo, Patricia arranged Tyler and Mason in front of the fireplace. "The legacy shot," she announced. When Sophia stepped forward, smiling, wanting to be part of the legacy, Patricia didn't yell. She just placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder and physically guided her out of the frame. "Just the bloodline, boys, for this one, sweetheart," she said. "You're blocking the light." She wasn't blocking the light. She was blocking the perfection. I looked at Sophia, now standing in our living room, her shoulders slumped under the weight of a 9-year-old's confusion. She looked up at me, her eyes red. "Why doesn't Grandma want me?" I knelt down, so I was eye level with her. This was the moment. I could lie. I could offer her the same counterfeit comfort I had been fed for decades, that Grandma was just stressed or didn't mean it, but that would be malpractice. That would be passing the debt down to another generation. "Listen to me," I said, keeping my voice steady and factual. "This isn't about you. You are not the problem. Grandma has a sickness. It's like she's carrying a heavy invisible chain. She tried to lock it around my ankle today. If I had stayed, if I had let you eat that cake or sit at that table, I would have locked that chain around your ankle too." Sophia blinked, processing the metaphor. "We didn't run away, Sophia," I told her, wiping a tear from her cheek with my thumb. "We broke the chain. We are free. You never have to earn a seat at a table that doesn't want you. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly. "So, we don't have to go back?" "Never," I promised. "That contract is cancelled." I made her a grilled cheese sandwich, simple, warm, honest food, and put on her favorite movie. I watched her until her breathing evened out and she fell asleep on the sofa. She was safe. She was out of the blast zone. But I wasn't done. I walked into my home office and sat down at my desk. The emotional part of the evening was over. Now the audit began. My mother thought she had dismissed a daughter. She didn't realize she had just unleashed a forensic accountant. I remembered a conversation from the lunch table, something Tyler had bragged about, between spoonfuls of bisque, the new deck renovation costing $40,000. And I remembered something else. My mother was the treasurer of the Children's Art Charity, a non-profit my father had founded before he died. I cracked my knuckles and woke up my computer. It was time to see who actually paid for that deck. I didn't sleep well, but I woke up clear. My phone was vibrating against the nightstand, a relentless, angry buzz that signaled the morning briefing from headquarters. I didn't reach for it with dread. I reached for it with the detached curiosity of a claims adjuster inspecting a wreck. There were 14 messages, 11 from my mother, 3 from Tyler. I opened Patricia's thread first. There was no apology. "No, I'm sorry I hurt you. There was only damage control. You made a scene, Natalie. You ruined the aesthetic of the luncheon. Do you have any idea how much we paid for that photographer?" I scrolled down. The timestamps showed she had been spiraling all night. "We have the charity gala next week. You need to fix your face and be there. We can't look divided. The donors expect a united front." Then a final command at 6 in the morning: "Stop being dramatic, it's unbecoming." I switched to Tyler's thread. "Mom is a wreck. Thanks a lot. You've always been jealous of Mason, but this is a new low. Just apologize so we can move on." I set the phone down on the kitchen counter next to my coffee. The old Natalie would have drafted a long, emotional paragraph explaining my feelings. The old Natalie would have tried to negotiate her humanity. But I wasn't her anymore. I was a landscape architect. My job is to look at a piece of land, identify the drainage issues, the rot and the instability, and then fix it. You don't argue with a mudslide. You build a retaining wall. I didn't reply. I didn't block them. I needed the line open. They were providing evidence of their own volatility. Instead, I focused on a single data point that had been nagging me since yesterday's lunch. Tyler's bragging. Between bites of lobster, he had boasted about the renovations to the lake house. "New teak decking," he'd said. "Imported. Cost $40,000, but it adds $100 to the value." $40,000. My mother's children's art charity had been struggling for 2 years. She had complained about donor fatigue and cut back on the art supplies sent to the inner-city schools the charity was supposed to serve. Yet she had just renovated her vacation home with imported teak. I walked into my home office. The morning sun was hitting my desk, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sat down and opened my laptop. I wasn't just a daughter. I was a former board member. I had resigned 3 years ago when the aesthetic of the meetings became more important than the mission, but I had never revoked my administrative access to the financial portal. It was an oversight on their part. It was a tactical advantage on mine. I typed in my credentials. The screen loaded. Welcome, Natalie. I wasn't looking for love anymore. I was looking for a wire transfer. I navigated to the expense reports for the last quarter. My heart rate didn't spike. This wasn't an emotional invasion of privacy. It was a professional audit of a nonprofit organization that bore my father's name. I filtered by contractor services. The list populated. There were the usual small payments for event setups and catering. And then there it was, dated 6 weeks ago, a payment of $32,500. The payee wasn't an art supplier. It wasn't a scholarship fund. It was Apex Marine Construction. The same company Tyler had tagged in his Instagram story about the new deck. I leaned back in my chair. The pieces clicked into place with the satisfying sound of a deadbolt sliding home. She wasn't just cruel, she was a thief, and she had just invited me to the scene of the crime. The screen glowed blue in the darkened office, illuminating the evidence of a crime that went far beyond simple greed. I stared at the entry for Apex Marine Construction. $32,500. It was a staggering amount for a charity that had claimed poverty for 18 months. It was enough to buy art supplies for 3 inner-city school districts. Instead, it had bought a teak deck for a lake house where my daughter wasn't welcome. But as my eyes scanned the ledger, the cold knot in my stomach tightened into something sharper. Something lethal. In accounting, money has a source. You don't just pull cash from thin air, you pull it from a specific bucket. I traced the transaction back to its origin account. I expected to see the general operating fund or perhaps the unrestricted donations account. Those were the slush funds, the places where gray areas usually lived. But the withdrawal hadn't come from there. Those accounts were empty, drained dry months ago to cover administrative costs, another euphemism for my mother's lifestyle, I suspected. No, this transfer came from a restricted endowment, account ending in 409. I clicked on the account details. The name of the fund appeared at the top of the screen, the Robert Memorial Scholarship. My breath hitched. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin. My father, Robert, was a man who believed in 2 things, hard work and kindness. He had grown up with nothing, painting on discarded cardboard because he couldn't afford canvas. When he died 5 years ago, he asked for one thing. He didn't want a statue. He didn't want a building named after him. He wanted a scholarship fund to ensure that talented kids from the neighborhood he grew up in could afford art school. We had poured his life insurance money into that fund. It was sacred. It was the last piece of him left on this earth. And Patricia had raided it to build a deck. She hadn't just stolen money, she had stolen his legacy. She had looked at the money meant to honor her dead husband and decided it would look better as a patio for her golden grandchild. My hands hovered over the keyboard. I wasn't trembling anymore. I was vibrating with a frequency of rage I didn't know existed. I kept digging. If she had broken the seal on the memorial fund, what else had she taken? I found another transfer dated 2 weeks prior, $4,000. The payee was Pacific Sailing Academy. Mason's sailing lessons. I remembered Tyler bragging about that too. Mason's a natural, he'd said. Private instruction, top of the line. They were living a champagne life on a charity budget. They were stripping the copper wiring out of my father's tomb to pay for their hobbies. I closed my eyes for a second, picturing my father. I pictured his rough, paint-stained hands. I pictured the way he used to look at my mother with adoration, believing she was the class and culture he lacked. He had died thinking she was his partner. He had no idea she was a parasite. I opened my eyes. The sadness was gone. It had been incinerated. I hit print. The printer in the corner whirred to life, a mechanical rhythm in the quiet house. Chug, chug, chug. It spat out the bank statements, the wire transfers, the contractor invoices I found cross-referenced in the MISC folder. I didn't stop there. I downloaded the entire database. I exported every ledger, every email, every receipt. I backed it up to an external hard drive, then to a cloud server, then to a USB drive attached to my keychain. My mother wanted me at the charity gala. She wanted the united front. She wanted the dutiful daughter to stand silently in the background, smiling like a prop to validate her image as the benevolent matriarch. She had demanded I fix my face. I looked at my reflection in the dark window of the office. My face was fixed. It was set in stone. I picked up the stack of warm paper from the printer tray. It felt heavy like a weapon. I wasn't going to the gala to smile. I wasn't going to the gala to make peace. I was going to the gala to introduce my mother to the consequences of her own actions. The charity gala was held in the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, a space that smelled of white lilies and old money. I walked in wearing a black dress that felt less like clothing and more like armor. My mother Patricia spotted me from across the room. She was holding a champagne flute surrounded by the city's elite donors, wearing a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. She excused herself and glided over to me. She didn't hug me. She leaned in close, her voice a hiss disguised as a whisper. "You're late. Fix your face, Natalie. The mayor is here." "I'm here, aren't I?" I said, my voice flat. "Just stand by the podium when I call the family up," she commanded. "And try to look like you actually care about your father's legacy." The irony was so sharp I almost tasted blood. I watched her walk away, smoothing her silk gown, returning to her performance. She was the grieving widow, the philanthropist, the saint. I looked around the room. I saw my brother Tyler laughing near the bar, likely bragging about the lake house renovations to anyone who would listen. I saw Mason bored in a suit playing on an iPad that was probably bought with donor money. I didn't go to the podium. I went to the AV booth. I knew the setup. I had organized this gala for 3 years before I resigned. I knew the tech director, a young guy named Kevin, who was currently distracted by his phone. I slipped past the velvet rope. "Hey Kevin," I said. "Patricia wants a last-minute addition to the slideshow. A tribute to Dad." He didn't even look up. "Sure thing, Nat. Just plug into the auxiliary, channel 3. I pulled the USB drive from my clutch. It was small, silver, and contained the end of my mother's world. I plugged it in. On stage, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit Patricia. She stepped up to the microphone, dabbing a dry eye with a handkerchief. The room fell into a respectful hush. "My late husband Robert was a man of vision," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "He believed that every child, no matter their background, deserved the tools to create art. He believed in giving the underprivileged a canvas." She paused for effect. The audience leaned in. "That is why," she continued, "even in these hard economic times, we have fought to keep the Robert Memorial Scholarship alive. We have sacrificed. We have scraped. Because the children need us." I waited for the applause to start. Then, I hit enter. The massive projection screen behind her, which had been displaying a soft focus photo of my father, flickered. The image changed. It wasn't a photo of a smiling child. It wasn't a painting. It was a PDF. High definition. 10 feet tall. The header read the Robert Memorial Scholarship Fund, transaction record. The room didn't react instantly. People squinted. They were confused. Then I hit the arrow key. The next slide appeared. A scanned invoice. Payee Apex Marine Construction. Service Custom Teak Decking and Installation. Lake Tahoe Residence. Amount $32,500. Source account Robert Memorial Scholarship. A ripple of murmurs started in the front row and spread backward like a wave. I saw the mayor adjust his glasses. I saw the head of the hospital board lean forward. Patricia turned around. She looked up at the screen. For a second, she just stared, her brain unable to process the data. Then her knees buckled. She grabbed the podium for support, the microphone screeching with feedback. I didn't stop. I clicked again. Payee Pacific Sailing Academy. Service Private Instruction. Mason Ingram. Amount $4,000. Source account Robert Memorial Scholarship. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. You could hear the hum of the projector fan. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. Patricia looked out at the crowd. The mask was gone. The benevolent matriarch had dissolved, leaving behind a terrified small woman who had been caught stealing from her dead husband's grave. She looked toward the AV booth. She saw me. Our eyes met. In the past, her gaze would have made me wither. It would have made me apologize. But tonight she looked at me, and she didn't see a daughter. She saw a judge. I didn't say a word. I didn't grab the microphone to make a speech. The receipts were screaming loud enough for both of us. I pulled the USB drive out. The screen went black. I walked out of the booth, past the frozen waiters, past the horrified donors, and out the double doors. I walked through the lobby and into the cool night air. My heels clicked on the pavement, a steady, rhythmic sound. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening behind those doors. The tower was falling. and I wasn't there to catch it. The fallout wasn't a landslide, it was an avalanche. By Monday morning, Patricia had been removed from the board of directors. By Tuesday, the state attorney general's office had opened an investigation. The lake house, the symbol of her status and the site of my daughter's exclusion, was seized. It was put on the market to pay restitution to the fund. My mother didn't call me. She didn't text. Her lawyer contacted mine, but there was nothing to discuss. The evidence was 10 feet tall and digital. But the real end of the story didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened in the dirt. 6 months later, I stood in an empty lot in the city, a plot of land the charity had owned but neglected for years. The weeds were gone. The soil had been turned. I held a blueprint in my hands. It wasn't for a luxury deck or a private retreat. It was for the Robert Community Garden and Art Park. Using the funds recovered from the sale of the lake house, the new board had hired me not as a daughter but as a landscape architect to build something real. I watched Sophia. She was kneeling in a garden bed, painting smooth river rocks with bright waterproof colors. She wasn't sitting at a staff table. She wasn't being pushed out of the frame. She was in the center of it all, her hands covered in paint, laughing with 3 other children from the neighborhood. I walked over and knelt beside her. "What are you making?" "A welcome sign," she said, holding up a rock painted with a sun. I smiled. The anger that had fueled me for so long had evaporated, leaving behind a quiet, fertile peace. I realized then that true justice isn't just about burning down the weeds. It isn't just about exposing the rot or punishing the thief. That's the first step, but it's not the last. The justice of the sower is about what you plant in the clearing. It's about taking the space that was occupied by cruelty and filling it with something that grows. My mother had tried to build a legacy on exclusion and theft. I was building mine on inclusion and dirt. I picked up a trowel and dug into the earth. The soil was rich and dark. It was ready. We didn't need the lake house. We didn't need the crystal glasses or the mahogany tables. We had the sun, we had the truth, and we had each other. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to save yourself, share this story. You are not the villain in your own healing. You are the architect of your own peace.